Sometimes, Russ, when I'm listening to classical music, I'll get sort of obsessed with one composer. Like, I want to hear all Mozart, one of my favorite composers, or all Brahms. And that happened to me this week, except that it was all Vivaldi, which I think has never happened to me before. I just got into Vivaldi. I was doing my sort of work at home and just got out a stack of Vivaldi CDs and just kept putting them on. Interesting. That wouldn't be one I would expect to pop up on your list right away. Yeah, it usually doesn't. But I have a lot of them over the years that I've collected over the years. But, because they're short movements and, they kind of get going on. But I was just doing the work and it just felt really good. So I'm in a Vivaldi phase at the moment. It's kind of good, energetic music to get work done to, though. I would agree with that. It's lively, and it's got that sort of Italianate sprung rhythm quality to it, and I think I really needed that this week. And also, I was listening to a record by our good friend Théotime Langlois de Swart. He did a Vivaldi album last year that we didn't talk about because it was a double album. And then he's got a new one coming out of the Four Seasons this year, which I may put on, even though that's a double album too. I enjoy his playing a lot, so I'll be interested in hearing that. I got to tell you, I'm kind of sorry we didn't do that album because it's pretty great, but we'll get him this year. It's really interesting playing, interesting approach to those pieces. So there you go. I'm in this Vivaldi phase. I guess we'll get to him in a few weeks. Sounds good to me. You're listening to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. We're here on episode 198. Really? 198? Wow. Closing in on 200. Looking forward to that. Also, our anniversary is coming up. That's right. February 11th was the first recording, and February 14th, Valentine's Day, was the first upload onto the internet of our episode. So it's going to be 4 years now. Can you believe it? Wow. Yeah. We've been doing this for 4 years. It seems like 2. It does. But there's been a lot of music in there. Absolutely. I don't know what the count is. I'll have to look, but I think probably getting close to 1,200 recordings now. I do know that I don't remember it all, because sometimes I look at the shelves, because especially in the early years. Right. I collected a lot of those CDs, and I look at them, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, we talked about this. I forgot I even had it, We'll have to do something to celebrate, maybe take some new pictures, too. New pictures, because we're getting older. Yes. You got to chronicle that. Older and wiser, hopefully, at least musically. Let's hope so. Well, certainly wiser musically, yeah. I hear a lot more detail. I'm kind of hearing in classical music a lot more of the structure of these really difficult pieces. Like, who knew? But I guess just talking about it, you start hearing more and thinking about more. Training yourself to listen deeper and to more details, I think. And exercising our right brain, apparently, because I've been reading that book, The Master and His Emissary, by James McGilchrist. Recommended, by the way, except for if anybody out there wants to read that book, once you get to Unit 3, be careful, because it's like a list of things the right brain and left brain do, and it's just kind of overwhelming. But once you get past that, it's really interesting. And one of the things he says, and I think this was in The Singing Neanderthals, too, another book that you've read. That's a good one. Actually. I've read that, yeah. Yeah. That music comes before language, people think. Now, there are a lot of people who say language came before music, and Steven Pinker is one of those. But this argument is that music came first, and they use like babies to give an example of that, where they'll make sounds before they talk. And music is a right brain activity because it doesn't really have meaning, so it just sort of I can't really articulate it as well as he did. It also kind of connected us in a way where language kind of can separate us, and we've been seeing that politically in the last few years. But it's a pretty interesting book, and I've been thinking about that too. So I guess we're developing our right brain by doing all this listening. But we're supposed to be participating. We're listening to recordings, which really are kind of like people who collect butterflies and they pin the dead butterfly to the wall. It's not really a butterfly, so I guess listening to recorded music isn't actually, in a sense, living music. But I still love it. It's a privilege of our modern society. Exactly. And we've got some great recordings to tell you about and share with you this evening. I'm really looking forward to talking about some of these recordings tonight. Yeah, me too. And also for next week, because we got good stuff coming up too. It's like an embarras de riche, as the French say. Here in January. Who knew 2025 is starting out to be an amazing year in music, at least in classical and jazz. That's right. So let's get into it. And before we do, I want to remind all of our listeners, and also to any new listeners, in the episode description, as always, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon for all of the recordings that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France.
And if you can't see the full description or the recording list or links are hard to follow on whatever app you're listening to us on now, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything's easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us and tell a music-loving friend. And if you take just a moment, give us a ranking or write a short review. That helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, and that helps us get new listeners. You can come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info on new releases and things during the week. Leave a message or comment there. And you can also check us out on X now too. Our ID there is Adult Music Pod. I'll put up links to the episodes there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to play music samples as we go along through these recordings, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, please consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists.
I'll do that. I listen to you every time.
You do buy a lot of CDs.
I do. I'm buying a lot this year all of a sudden, even though I can't really afford them. But because so many good ones have come out all of a sudden. I just want to start the year out with those.
And we're going to go back in time a bit to start out this episode.
Yeah, in fact, this is our first episode of an anniversary.
Right.
And this year is the anniversary. Well, there are 3 anniversaries that I know of. The other 2 are Ravel, it's 150th anniversary of his birth, and Pierre Boulez, the, I think, 100th anniversary of his birth. The other one is the one we're talking about tonight, Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, one of the great Italian composers of the Renaissance, the 500-year anniversary of his birth.
Wow.
Wow, 500 years ago, this music was being made. And this is one of 2 albums of his that I'm aware of that have just come out, 2 major releases. This is the first of them. We'll do the other one in a few weeks. I want to break it up a little bit. But this one is called Palestrina Revealed, and it's on Harmonia Mundi, performed by the choir of Clare College, Cambridge, conducted by Graham Ross. And it features music by Palestrina mostly, but also some British composers as well from the same era. Graham Ross says that he includes on the album 2 Palestrina masses and also music from the English choral tradition.
Right.
In order to put Palestrina into his historical context, I guess among English listeners, programming settings of the same texts that Palestrina set. You can compare how different composers would set the same words. He says they make for fascinating side-by-side comparisons, although I thought they were just interesting on their own a lot of times, of different European styles. The choir in this recording uses a circular formation for the entire album. Again, making me wish there were a surround sound recording of it available. You have a circular...
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it would be great if it was surround, because you'd hear those voices coming from different parts of the room. But, of course, they're coming from your 2 front speakers when you have 2 channels. But a remarkable thing that happens as a result of that formation is you get this incredible clarity of sound in these really dense, polyphonic, voice against voice textures. So this is a really great sounding album. So right away, I'm going to recommend it for that. Also, the performances are great, but let's get into it and you can hear for yourself. Track 1, we start with Palestrina himself, Magnificat Secundi Toni. Now, it's for 5 voices. Now, the word you want to pull out of that is Magnificat. That's the
Virgin Mary's
exclamation. You say prayer, but it's not really a prayer. It's more of what she said when Gabriel announced to her that she was going to give birth to the baby Jesus. Anyway, the Magnificat is sung daily at Vespers, which is the evening meeting of the monks in the monastery. The opening starts with a unison Gregorian chant sound that we often hear in the Mass settings, and then this rather small ensemble produces threads of gorgeous sound aided by Palestrina's composition method of having the syllables pop out of the polyphony. Yes, a little history lesson. By the time that Palestrina was around, composers like Josquin and all those other composers of that era were producing this music that was really complex and polyphonic. This was around the time of the Reformation of the church, and the Catholic Church was getting really mad that you couldn't hear the text. They thought the text was more important than the music because it's talking about God. So they wanted to just ban music from the church. Could you imagine? That would have been horrible.
Yeah.
So enter Palestrina, as Robert Greenberg described him in a lecture I once heard. The Lone Ranger of Western classical music comes riding in on his horse and comes up with a style of polyphonic writing where you can hear the syllables of the words clearly in every layer of the voice. And this is why he's so famous, and still his polyphonic style is still taught in music schools today because of that, because of the clarity of the text he gets. So you want to be listening to that while you're listening to these samples and while you're hearing this album. So the syllables pop out of the polyphonic lines. The text is easily followable as a result of this, and the tempo chosen here is pretty quick, the text passing by rather quickly. I like the tempo this way. It livens up the composition. Yeah, sometimes when the tempo is just kind of ordinary, it's relaxing, but you just kind of stop paying attention. That didn't happen here. Every other line is set to unison modal melody as used in Gregorian chants. So there are sections of polyphony, and then there'll be one voice or unison voices chanting like in a Gregorian chant style. Soprano voices get some soaring moments, and I think I'm going to sample one of those because that's pretty exciting. So let's do our first sample of this piece. Maybe you don't understand the words of the Latin text, but I'm sure you can hear the consonant sounds coming out of that texture.
Yeah,
that would
clearly.
make it, that would make it easy to follow if you had the text in front of you. The choir also uses varying dynamic levels to distinguish sections of the text. I particularly liked the fecit potentiam, which means he has shown the strength of his arm, that part. Section just after 4 minutes for its hush. By the way, if you want to look up the Magnificat text, it's in Luke.
Right.
I forget the exact place, but that story is there. I had mentioned I like the fecit potentiam just after the 4 minute mark for the hush that the choir gets. You'd think it would be a louder section. Potentiam, the power, right? The strength. But Palestrina divides the men's and women's voices in alternating lines in the 5th minute. It's another pleasing effect, and then gives the work a bit of rhythm for the Sicut Locutus Est section, or as he promised to our forefathers. This is a great showpiece to start the album with, and I'm engaged right away. I'm really excited to hear this album, which is pretty long at 1 hour and 19 minutes, but turned out not to be an issue. The second track is music by William Byrd, British composer, and one I like a lot. This is Emendimus in Melius for 5 voices. The text is a responsory during the imposition of ashes on Ash Wednesday, and the Matins respond for the first Sunday in Lent. The text starts in harmonized block chords, and it slowly flows by. It means, let us make amends for the sins we have committed in ignorance. And this is sung in Latin. And I'll give you a sample of this. So this is William Byrd. Yeah, gorgeous lines and texture there. It's a good contrast to the previous work. And then we get Palestrina's Mass based on this melody, I guess, or this text anyway. Tracks 3 through 8 are Palestrina's Missa Emendimus in Melius. So this is set to that text or the Gregorian chant that goes with it, I think. This is for 4 voices. Track 3 is the Kyrie, which means Lord have mercy, Kyrie eleison. Keeping in mind that this mass is based on the melody that the previous text is sung to, or maybe it's based on something Palestrina had written previously to this text. I'm not really sure about that. But let's hear Palestrina's more modest harmonic setting of this work. Now, if you want to hear those consonants pop out of the text and follow the text, this is a pretty easy one to follow. The words you're hearing are Kyrie eleison. See if you can hear it. And then we go quickly to the Christe eleison, Christ have mercy. It's pretty easy to follow, too, with that rising figure, Kyrie, and you hear that in every voice. So even the melody makes it easy to pull out. This Kyrie just floats by on a strong breeze. It's pretty quick and unfussily set, and I find this performance warming. Track 4, the Gloria. I like the anticipation that awaits us after the opening chant. You get that pause, and you're wondering how the rest of the text will be set. There's that moment, that pregnant pause where you're like, oh, what kind of magic is going to come out of this choir? So let's hear the opening, the Gregorian chant, and anticipate that for ourselves here. All right, not much counterpoint in that sample. There is a little bit of the voices going against that main melody. But again, notice how easy it is to follow the text. Palestrina was famous for this, but the choir of Clare College's lean sound contributes a lot. Again, I like the flow that this particular movement is set to. It's taken at a fairly quick tempo. The shape of the melodies are thrown in high relief. When you play faster, you can kind of hear the shape outlined more easily. It's sort of like, digital, if you're looking at a digital image, you see all these like dots, and if there's a high sampling rate, they form more of a solid line. I kind of feel like that happens when you quicken the tempo, too, of a piece of music. Notice at about the 1 minute and 50-second mark how all of the quis in Qui tollis peccata mundi are clearly audible. Gorgeous writing and singing and ensemble work there. The Gloria is a pretty long section of the Mass, but both the setting and the tempo make this go by quickly, as well as the pleasure I got from the performance. The Cum Sancto Spiritu gets a bit of a surprising, sudden rhythmic bounce toward the end. Cum Sancto Spiritu, and with the Holy Spirit. Track 5, Credo, I believe in one God. I like the opening gambit here. After the chant, the voices come in pairs. First the upper women's voices, followed by the men. Let's hear that too. All right, now to be more accurate, you heard the men's voices right from the beginning, but they were singing the bass, and then they came up into the spotlight after that. Palestrina keeps to some block harmonies at certain sections of this text, marking them off. The et resurrexit, and he was resurrected, gets a sudden jolt or rhythm and bounce, making this already energetic setting and performance liven up further. Track 6, the Sanctus and Benedictus. This is the fourth section of the Mass. It starts more solemnly than the previous sections and continues with a bit of a hush over it. By the 1 minute and 30-second mark, the sound has opened up to full-voiced singing. I liked the solo voice entries for the Benedictus section at the 2-minute mark, and would like to sample that too. Please notice how much variety there is in this one Mass, and really on this album so far. And of course, we're having no problem understanding the word Benedictus when we hear it. An amazing thing about this recording is if you listen to that in your headphones, even in a stereo with a wide separation, you hear the voices coming out of different parts of the speakers. It's pretty interesting. That's the result of the circular formation that the choir takes. This features only the men's voices, providing a change of timbre for this section of the Mass. The movement wraps up quickly with the full choir. Track 7, Agnus Dei 1. This begins with pairs of voices entering as well at a softer tempo that builds as more voices come in. The setting is on the solemn side, and then finally in track 8 we get Agnus Dei number 2, Lamb of God, for 5 voices. The full choir comes in together for this more solemn setting, providing a warm blanket of sound, moving in gentle, undulating melodic waves. It's a brief movement that ends the Mass. Okay, back to our British composers. Track 9 is Robert White. Ad te levavi oculos meos. To you I lift my eyes, for 6 voices. This has a nice rippling upward opening in the women's voices, with the men then coming in to anchor the harmony. I really liked this a lot. Let's hear it. The rhythmic effect created by the writing creates a kind of fabric in a breeze rippling effect in the texture. I'm pretty amazed at the transparency of the recording, with the middle voices as easily separable by the ear as are the higher, soaring soprano voices. It's not just the composition, but the recording and placement of the ensemble. The circular grouping works well here. There's a pause at 3 minutes and 54 seconds, after which a new section begins, with a start much like the opening of the piece. This is for the Miserere section of the text. Have mercy on me, Miserere. There are some beautifully downward cascading patterns in the 5th minute on the words Quia multum repleti sumus despectione, which means because we are greatly filled with contempt. You have to read the whole prayer to understand why that's there. So listen for those downward cascading patterns. Sample this entire track, by the way. This might be my favorite overall composition on the album. Track 9, Robert White, Ad te levavi oculos meos. Track 10 is Palestrina's setting of the same text. This is for 12 voices. Palestrina's setting of the same text starts with a single high soprano voice, tone painting the words Ad te levavi oculos meos. To you I have lifted up my eyes. So she's also lifted up her voice, apparently, to indicate that. And again, listen for the words. Not difficult to pull out. And you're hearing these voices just pop out from all over the spectrum that the two speakers create. It's a really fun listen in headphones. This is a more modest, understated setting, again with the miraculous sense of the consonant sounds popping out of the complex, though light texture. It's easier to keep your place in the text while listening to this. Listen especially from 3 minutes on for the constant K sounds of consonants. Track 11, William Mundy, British composer, Memor esto verbi tui, for 6 voices. Mundi sets this text, which means think upon your servant as concerning your word, in an understated, modest fashion. There's a new, equally modest section beginning at around the 2-minute and 30-second mark. The downward entry of voices on the word exquivi, the second to last word sung on the track, is exquisite, as the word would indicate. Listen from 5 minutes and 30 seconds onwards there. Track 12, Palestrina, same text, Memor esto verbi tui, for 5 voices. Here, Palestrina sets a shortened version of the text. It's taken at a slower pace than the Mundi setting, and the voices open like a flower in spring when they're introduced. Let's hear a bit of that effect. I really love those little moments when the lower voices are exposed, when the soprano stops singing momentarily, and then you hear that very different sounding timbre. It's really kind of exciting. It gives me a chill. In this particular track, the middle voices, the ones you usually can't pick out as easily in polyphonic textures like this, register the most strongly, assuming that you're choosing to zoom in on them. The new text keeps coming in layered over the end of previous lines. It's a beautiful effect. Tracks 13 through 17 are the second Mass by Palestrina on the album. This is Missa Memor esto verbi tui for 5 voices. And this is setting the melody that you just heard, because that's by Palestrina. Okay, so he's setting his own melody to the text of the Mass here. So track 13 is the Kyrie, and the entries start with the alto voices and head up to the sopranos, who soar throughout, the men's voices anchoring the harmony. Tenors begin the Christe eleison section. Voices move gently throughout. The final Kyrie is brief. Track 14, Gloria. Here, all the voices come in block harmony after the initial Gregorian modal line. Polyphony eventually emerges from this, and it sounds like for much of it, women's and men's voices combine the same lines and sing in counterpoint to each other. So pretty easy to separate those two timbres. The women's are up higher and the men's are lower. Though the texture does get more complex at times, the counterpoint expanding and contracting. Listen for that contracted harmony effect here. So this will be a little less florid, let's say. It's really funny. You hear those soprano voices heading towards a resting place, but the music just keeps going. It's really surprising every time it happens. Track 15, the Credo. This also comes in boldly after the opening chant, but with a softened edge as sung by the Clare College voices. There's quite a bit of melisma in the middle voices in the first minute. See if you can pick them out. It's a lot of activity, a lot of syllabic activity happening in each voice, and it's pretty exciting. From this setting, we actually get a sense of the narrative quality of this prayer. At the 3-minute mark, the Crucifixus section comes in with thinner textures and a lamenting, gentle tone. And at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, only 30 seconds later, there's a slight lift to the rhythm to indicate et resurrexit, the resurrection. The Et in Spiritum Sanctum section gets a block chord harmony with a swaying dotted rhythm, a little surprising there. That's just past the 5-minute mark. Track 16, Sanctus and Benedictus. The women's voices begin this gently with a rising figure after the sustained first note. The men enter immediately afterwards, and they're singing the word Sanctus 3 times. This will be very easy to follow. The Benedictus section begins with even more modest, winding lines dominated by the men's voices, with a single alto voice often providing counterpoint for brief periods above. And then finally the Agnus Dei, track 17. The tenor voices start this in a unison solo with the basses bringing the line downwards before the women's voices enter. It's an interestingly shaped melody, making it easy to pull out of the texture once all the voices are in counterpoint. It continues with solemnity, and the last notes are taken with a beautiful tapering off of dynamic. This album really is unmissable. It's a long album, but goes by fast, partly due to the engaging, lively tempos taken by director Graham Ross, and also because of the programming, which shows a lot of contrast between works. The program works well. It juxtaposes Palestrina's works with those of his English contemporaries. The recording is spectacular, with admirable transparency to it, and the performances are immaculate, with beautifully shaped, judged forces that make the music take on a lightness of texture. Grouping the ensemble in circular fashion seems to have helped the middle voices emerge on the recording with clarity. This is a fantastic recording with which to celebrate the 500-year anniversary of Palestrina's birth.
It really is a beautiful recording. Palestrina's music is somehow magical. The different approaches to line movement and harmony in contrast to the English composers I found to be very interesting. Sometimes the lines of Palestrina seem to echo Gregorian chant in the unharmonized, more plainer lines. However, Palestrina's cadences are stronger than those in the English compositions, which I found also an interesting contrast. The voices of the choir are well balanced, nuanced, and they have warmth through a range of moods that we get in these works, from somber and serious to quite joyful. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, and we need to think, when we listen to Palestrina's music, if you like counterpoint at all, Palestrina saved counterpoint, because without him, the church would have just ended it, and we just probably wouldn't have heard it again. Because he allowed it to continue, we got it from Bach, because Bach, of course, studied Palestrina's counterpoint as well, and it just developed in its own way. It would have been very different without Palestrina. He's a really key composer in Western music history.
Right.
The second album that we're going to talk about tonight is really some of my favorite chamber music. This is by the French composer Claude Debussy, late 19th century to early 20th century composer. These are all early 20th century works. The Sonatas pour divers instruments, or for different instruments or different combinations of instruments, along with the string quartet and an arrangement of his Prélude à l'après-midi d'enfant. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is by the Nash Ensemble, a British ensemble, and they are sort of a collective. They have sort of different members on each album they put out. And again, one of my favorite ensembles too. This is on the Hyperion label, came out on January 10th. And I should mention the Palestrina before that. I didn't think I said the date. That's also a January 10th release. This album opens with an arrangement of Prélude à l'après-midi d'enfant. This is often said to be the piece that started modernism in music. This was arranged by the French oboist and composer David Walter, born in 1958. I guess he's still alive. For wind quintet, string quintet, so that's 10 instruments right there. Harp and crotales. So you have 12 players on this. Those players are Philippa Davies on flute, Gareth Hulse on oboe, Richard Hosford clarinet, John McDougall bassoon, Richard Watkins horn. Okay, that's the wind quintet. Benjamin Nabarro violin, Jonathan Stone violin, Lawrence Power viola, Adrian Brendel cello, Graham Mitchell double bass. There's your string quintet. And Lucy Wakeford on the harp and Richard Benjafield on the crotales. Now, the crotales are a set of really tiny cymbals, all arranged on a bar, and they kind of make a dinky chiming sound. Actually, it's a very charming sound. I shouldn't say it's dinky. It's pretty resonant. Anyway, this piece has gorgeous tone and voluptuosity to the shaping of the theme by the flute, Philippa Davies, and I know her as a pretty sensual player. I've heard her play on other albums as well. The piece comes across like the orchestral version until we hear the single wind instruments.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, just sort of, I mean, I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't know what it was going to sound like, and it came as a surprise. Much of the feel of the original orchestral version is there. This is an impressive arrangement and totally committed performance, and I really want to grab what's different about it, so I'm going to sample this from about the minute and 44-second mark. So in that sample, when you heard the flute solo, you were noticing that little kind of bassoon trill way at the bottom, and then the oboe just sort of answering the flute's line. Really magical details that you normally don't really pick up from the orchestral version. You have to listen very closely. This is an adventurous programming decision to open an album of chamber music with this arrangement. As this half-lit work reaches a louder dynamic in the third minute, we get a sense of the recording quality and balance of ensemble. The bass comes across powerfully and warmly. Of course, a lot of fragmentary melodic detail obscured by the orchestra comes across clearly in this arrangement. The French horn playing of Richard Watkins especially comes across with character and power. We finally hear the crotales at the 6 minute and 45-second mark, and they're tapped very lightly to accommodate the texture used in this arrangement. The very ending of this piece doesn't have the warmth of the orchestral version, but is nevertheless effective. The piece sounds lean in this arrangement and feels like it's sped by. Lines don't linger, but they're not particularly fast either. Tracks 2 through 4, the last big work that Debussy wrote in his life, the Violin Sonata in G minor. This is played by Stephanie Gonley on the violin and Alistair Beatson on piano. This is a 3-movement work. Track 2 is the first movement, Allegro Vivo. Beatson on the piano keeps a soft tone, but it's pretty firm here, and I like that. Usually we hear this played very gently. He gets a soft dynamic, but a real full tone. It's not trying for something feather light, as we often hear. Gonley is fleet-fingered on this and gets some effects from her bowing. The recording is close and all the more enjoyable for that. This is such a sure-footed performance that I've got to put it near the top of my preferred performances, though the quality of it is a little different than I'm used to. I like the upfrontness of the playing and recording here. Let's just hear the opening, because I really just love the opening. And if you know this work, listen to the quality of the piano tone at the beginning. It's stronger than you usually get. Beatson's tempo flags in the third minute for effect, which I found interesting. The duo take this section more slowly than usual, setting it off against the fleeter repeat of the opening that follows at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The violin's high note at 4:45 downplays the drama a bit, and the very ending has a passionate sound to it. Track 3, Intermède, Fantasque et Légère. This is the middle movement, and the opening is taken at a quick tempo. The violin gets some solo time here, slowing the tempo slightly as she winds down to a bottom note. Again, the recording and tone of Beatson's piano are solid and upfront. I'm going to sample this after it gets going a bit at about the 1 minute mark. Again, you want to notice that firm piano tone. The duo take the sudden rhythmic changes well, surprising the listener with the sudden shifts. The movement ends with a light tone from the violin registering well on the recording. Track 4, the finale, Très animé. Beatson starts the opening staccato figures with a light touch, and the violin's line recalls the opening, but it's at a slower tempo here and played with a lighter touch. That changes with the outburst just after the 30-second mark, and I'm going to go to that. We get that big build there. The playing is more forthright from this point. The movement and indeed entire piece is played for maximum contrast between sections, the third minute going for a forthright sound. The rumbling piano chords at 3 minutes and 50 seconds register strongly, though they're quiet. The ending is taken at quite a clip and is exciting. Now, I had mentioned their maximum contrast, and that seems to be a theme of this album. The Nash Ensemble, although there are different performers in each work, really take that same approach. So we're going to hear this again in the piece on tracks 5 through 7, Sonata for Flute, Viola, and Harp, featuring Philippa Davies on the flute, Lawrence Power on viola, and Lucy Wakeford on harp. Track 5 is the first movement, Pastoral, Lento Dolce Rubato. Davies gets a similarly sensuous tone on the flute as the one she produced in the opening Prélude à l'après-midi d'enfant. There's a voluptuosity to her tone in the mid-range that I enjoy, and that gives this work an extra dimension. The movement is played at a slowish tempo, allowing the voluptuosity of the melodic lines to register. Let's hear a little bit of that. One of the things I love about that is a little Debussy magic. When the flute tone becomes the viola tone, you almost don't hear them change, and then you realize you're hearing the viola. It's really a magical moment. Lawrence Power's timbre, while accompanying, comes through strongly in this excellent recording, as does Lucy Wakeford's harp, even at pianissimo dynamics, as in the opening of the second minute. The skipping dotted rhythm at the 3-minute mark is on the slow side and deeply etches the thematic material into the ear. Davies subtly alters her tone as the work goes on, producing numerous compelling moments. Track 6, the middle movement, called Interlude, tempo di minuetto, has a slow tempo with a voluptuous tone and melodic line from Philippa Davies again. Let's hear that. Power plays the viola melody with emotion the first time we hear it, then the tempo speeds up from around the 45-second mark. This particular performance also goes for a solid attack on the instruments, not trying to produce a softer, more pastel tone. They allow the tone to fully register and play full-toned pianissimi for the most part, saving the gentler touch for specific sections, like at 2 minutes and 25 seconds. We're back to a stronger solid tone on all three instruments at 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Power shapes his viola lines in the accompaniment in a way that you notice them even while other instruments have the theme. The timbre of the instrument always stands out, and I like his quick tremolo sound at 3 minutes and 30 seconds and after. Listen also to the very end from around 5 minutes and 15 seconds onward, where the instrumental timbres constantly grab the ear. This movement was really interesting. Track 7, the final movement, Finale, Allegro molto ma risoluto. I liked the harsh sound Powers got on the viola at the very opening of this movement. He rather grabs the spotlight despite the flute's more highlighted tone. This is rather an unusual approach for this piece, and it really grabbed my ear. Let's hear it. Yeah, Power gives the viola tone a rather nasty sort of sound, like it's kind of a cranky old person. The movement is taken with a more aggressive timbres, even verging on harsh tone from the instruments, particularly the viola, the most capable of that in this ensemble, with both flute and harp playing in a full-toned manner. It made the movement come to life in a different way for me. Listen to the staccato and all of the detail in the orchestration at 3 minutes and 25 seconds and onward. Tracks 8 through 10, the cello sonata in D minor. Now, I should mention with these three chamber works for different instruments, there were supposed to be 6 of them, but Debussy died after he wrote the violin sonata, which incidentally was originally going to be written for violin, oboe, and piano, but I guess he didn't find a way to put the oboe in there, and it wound up becoming for violin and piano. The cello sonata was the first of these 3 works to be written. And this features Adrian Brendel on cello and Simon Crawford Phillips on piano. So different artists here. Track 8, the prologue, is marked lent, sostenuto, e molto risoluto. So you have French and Italian mixed up there. Crawford Phillips is a new pianist on this recording. There must have been some kind of group meeting about the recording, because even these musicians play with strong, deliberate tone, which is unique to my ear in these works. Maybe it comes from having almost everyone playing on the prelude at the beginning. Adrian Brendel positively explodes on his first note. Let's hear the opening and his entry. so dramatic opening to that, and well taken. Brendel doesn't play this as lyrically as other cellists have. At 1 minute and 55 seconds, the ensemble is rather aggressive, but it leads to an intriguing, open-hearted sound at the theme at around 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Pianissimi are taken with a lighter touch, but nothing here gets toward the pastel we usually hear. New moods are conjured by the approach. The movement ends quietly and mysteriously. Track 9, the middle movement, Serenade, modérément animée. Both musicians play with the rhythm in the opening staccato of this movement. Let's hear that. All right, now, I should mention there's a really famous recording of the cello sonata by Mstislav Rostropovich and Benjamin Britten, where they really take some liberties with that opening too. That happens here too, but it's a very different kind of quality to the approach. So interesting to juxtapose those two works. They're very different. Here, Brendel manages to give his tone an unusual dark color and interesting character during his plucked staccato lines. He's very mercurial in his playing here, changing moods on a dime, which is what the music wants. Again, it's an interesting approach. The cello's tone comes through richly on the recording. At the end, tempo is rubbery again, but expressive. This leads into the next movement, track 10, the finale, animé, léger, and nerveux. Brendel makes sure his staccato come through over the busy piano opening. The theme at 20 seconds doesn't come across joyfully as it so often does, but with a rather unusual character, and again, I'm left reinterpreting the work. Let's hear it. The tempo varies throughout and is overall pretty quick. Brendel goes for quick dramatic gestures when the opportunity is given to him. The quick cello line at 2 minutes and 20 seconds comes across as a complete scene change, Brendel buzzing through it like it's a Bartók work. The ending of the work is emphatically taken. All right, and the final work on the album is Debussy's early string quartet in G minor. This was written in the 1890s, and this features Benjamin Nabarro on violin, Jonathan Stone on the second violin, Lars Anders Tomter on viola, and Adrian Brendel on cello. Track 11 is the first movement of this four-movement work, marked Animé et très décidé. Great clarity on the recording for the opening of this movement. You can hear the cello's odd notes very clearly in the opening. Let's hear this. And now that I hear that in the headphones, I think that might have been the viola that I was hearing, one of the middle voices with the odder sounds. This is played with quick changes of texture as sections change. Those changes are accented by the performance. It's a dryish acoustic and a very close recording. The recording has a lot of transparency. Even the middle voices come out with clear focus. It's an interesting, unique interpretation, sort of getting this early work to rhyme with the later chamber works we just heard in the way that the mood changes so quickly. This performance focuses more on contrast and change in sections rather than getting the entire movement to sound of a flowing piece, which is how I've always heard it. I'm hanging on every sound, wondering what's coming next. There's rather a dance-like rhythm given to the flow of the theme at around the 5 minutes and 25 second mark, brief though it is. A big increase in tempo leads to the end's flourish, taken lightly. Track 12, Assez vif et bien rythmé. This is the staccato theme in the second movement. It's pretty straightforwardly played. The violins are up close and have that making popcorn quality to their pizzicati. The B section is legato in contrast to the A section. There's nothing unusual in this movement. It more or less sounds like other interpretations. Track 13, Andantino doucement expressif. The viola begins the movement with a legato-less tone, making the line sound mysterious. The cello repeats it, and the violins come across with a gauzy, muted tone, creating a sense of mist in the atmosphere. The touch used is very light, even during crescendos. We're hearing a quality of timbre here that we haven't heard elsewhere on the album, with all the lines played with a light touch. The middle declamatory section begins at 2 minutes and 37 seconds. The gorgeous chords played between solo lines don't register strongly, and for me, they're what make this music compelling. Melodies are thrown into high relief in this section. I'm going to give you a sample from about the 4-minute mark. And there's kind of a measured quality to the way the ensemble plays this, and I don't feel like it emotes as much as I'd like it to. This comes across with a lot of texture, which is interesting to me, but not much of a sense of release that I get from other performances. I like the sense of angularity the ensemble gives the unison modal melody lines at 5 minutes. I feel like the magic of this movement isn't being captured here. It's just got a lightness to it. The details that emerge are interesting, though. Track 14, Très modéré. The cello starts this out with a solo line, meditative like the slow movement, but the rest of the ensemble comes in to build up the energy. The chord at the 39-second mark comes across with a bit of its magic. Debussy was a sorcerer with harmony. The beginning comes across with amazing calm. Then as the rhythm builds up from 1 minute and 16 seconds, we get, again, maximum contrast. The rhythm of the section starting at around the 1 minute and 45-second mark is deeply etched, yet still highly controlled. It doesn't really take off. The through line is rather loose, and I feel like that hurts this performance. This really isn't a sectional movement as the later chamber works are. There is a through line despite many textural changes. The performance never really gains momentum to me. The most successful movement of the work is the first movement, I thought, and it's a shame this is the last track because it ends an album with some intriguing highs at a lower point. So I've heard several recordings of these works, and I have to say, this one stands out for its unique approach. That doesn't mean it's my favorite album of them, though I was intrigued throughout. I was especially surprised by the approach taken in the sonata for flute, viola, and harp. None of these works come across as merely pretty. There's a lot of expressive content in these performances, some of it surprisingly aggressive. The works are all played for contrast within their changing sections, including the early string quartet, which came as a surprise. I really didn't like the execution of the last 2 movements of the string quartet, but the rest of the works come across with a unique feel. The recording is close and on the dry side, and gives the performance maximum clarity. I was focused throughout the album, wondering what was coming next. I am wondering how this is going to hold up to repeated listens, though, and I do want to hear it again. For now, I have to say, it's intriguing. I thought the string quartet wasn't as well interpreted as the other works, but it's well worth hearing this album. I thought the 3 sonatas were fantastic and rather unique in this approach.
I've enjoyed all of the Nash Ensemble's recordings, and this will be one of my favorite ones by them. These are all very familiar works to me that I have multiple recordings of. And I like the performances a lot here because I thought that they had relatively understated interpretations and a lot of subtlety of expression. And what I mean by that, there are interesting choices that you pointed out.
Yeah, I thought so too, yeah.
But when I'm listening to Debussy, I'm really looking for the unique harmony and the wonderful timbre combinations. And sometimes I feel in performances that I hear the musicians are adding too much affect. They're trying to make the music more emotional than I feel it is. And that gets in the way of me enjoying some of what's written into the melodies and whatnot. I didn't get that from this performance. I felt it's more matter of fact with what's written in the composition, although there are unexpected kind of tempos or dynamic contrasts. But I felt like I wasn't getting extra syrup poured on the Debussy.
Yeah, that's always a good thing, I think.
And I like that. And I thought it was pretty well balanced and very clear in the recording. As you mentioned, it's up close and there's no sort of extra smearing of tones from room sound or anything like that. So I thought it kind of brought out the magic of the compositions that's really inherent. So I was basically pleased with the performances.
Right, it brought out that magic, but in a different way that I'm used to. And I think that's good when you reinvent the works. So I just want to see if I'm going to keep listening. I did like the recording as well. It sounded really great. All right, our third album. This is the contemporary one, although it's not all contemporary. Baltic Prayer. This features two musicians whose names I can't pronounce, but let's try. Dalia Dėdinskaitė on violin and Gleb Pyšniak on cello. I hope I'm close.
That's as close as I would guess.
Yeah. Vilnius Municipal Choir Jauna Muzika. Vilnius is in Lithuania. And conducted by Vaclovas Augustinas. This is on the Stradivarius label, and it was released on January 17th. Now, before we get into this, I've got to say something about the presentation, which is an absolute mess. The booklet doesn't include the track list or any texts. The track list is on the back of the jewel case. Mm-hmm. The track list, you could see the track list on the Stradivarius website. You can see the back insert. And when you look at that, you get a postage stamp sized window that you can't blow up. And you can expand the size of the text, but it blurs. And I'd like to suggest that Stradivarius make this site a bit more user-friendly. Also, include the track list in the booklet. People who are streaming don't have access to it in much detail from their streaming sites. Deezer annoyingly doesn't put the composers' names with the title of the work. Now, if you're listening on Apple Music, they always do, which I like about them. Also, Deezer's streaming service, and I checked other streaming services, has 7 tracks on this album, but the Stradivarius website and the back cover of the CD lists only 5 tracks.
Wow, that's strange.
Putting this presentation together took a lot of time, Stradivarius Records. I did your work for you. You should hire me to fix your booklet. Also, the booklet notes don't give much information about the works themselves, but we get enough, so we're okay. I'm kind of familiar with some of these composers and some of these works as well. The first one I know the composer, but not the work. Pēteris Vasks, a favorite of ours. Mm-hmm. He's Latvian, born in 1946, and this is his work Plainscapes from the year 2002. This features the violin and cello and a choir. The work consists of 3 vocalises, each separated by small interludes. The general mood is one of peace, and the crescendo near the end is a vision of nature awakening. So it's a pretty calm piece, or a very nature-based piece. Keep that in mind. It starts quietly and mysteriously with a single high vibratoless violin note. The choir comes in with light chords sung by single voices. We're in Vask's world of nature right away, complete with wavering, vibrato-filled glissandi, creating an eerie effect that we hear in many of his works. Vasks uses vibratoless melodies for his string instruments, then applies vibrato during glissandos, an interesting approach, giving the music a simultaneous Renaissance-era viola da gamba quality and a contemporary type of sound with the glissandi. Vask's lines are soothing, and I'll sample one of them for you right now. This is from around the 3-minute mark. I think one of the things that gives this work its glow is the timbral quality of the wordless choir. It's rather a unique sound. In the sample, we can hear an example of the vibrato's violin line, with the cello providing an anchoring bass line that also acts as a counter melody. I like the atmosphere that the choir provides in the background. At 4 minutes and 38 seconds, the choir gets the spotlight, framed by downward swooping glissandi on the violin, and this is something that Vasks does quite a bit. It's like part of his expressive vocabulary. He uses it in a lot of works. The piece has a bit harmonically in common with Arvo Pärt's music, but Vasks' fingerprints appear at certain points. The climax is reached via dynamics at around the 11-minute mark and afterwards, as we hear the loudest part of the composition. At the 11-minute and 52-second mark, the music suddenly stops, and we hear recorded bird sounds, which is rather a surprise, but nature has awakened after that climax, as we know from the notes. As this happens, the violin and cello start a minimalist type of rhythm. We hear a reminder of the opening at the very end in the solemn, religious-sounding violin and cello lines, along with a vibrato-laden glissandi. It's a beautiful piece, and really very typical of Vasks' style. The choir adds a new kind of timbre to his music. Track 2, Anatolius Senderovas. I hope I'm close. He was Lithuanian, 1945 to 2019. This is his work, Dialogues. If you're not paying attention, you would think this piece is a continuation of the previous track. It starts with a light, wispy-sounding vibratoless high melody on the violin. As the harmony gathers, we start to hear microtones added and some other harsh harmonies that we wouldn't hear in Vasks' music. The dialogue here is between the independent violin and cello lines. They do occasionally come together, but this is a rough-edged piece with gentle moments like the one for the violin at 1 minute and 50 seconds. At 2 minutes and 15 seconds, a more aggressive rhythmic section starts, and for contrast with the previous work, I'm going to sample this. And at the end of that sample, we get some emotive moments from both the cello and the violin. At 3 minutes and 24 seconds, the cello starts a rhythmic pulse that both violin and cello play over. Moods morph rather quickly and picks up an aggressive folk dance-like quality. After this, at 5 minutes and 14 seconds, the piece returns to the soft, mysterious mood of the opening and ends on a tapering line from the violin with wavering cello accompanying. Track 3, a favorite composer of ours and most of the world, Arvo Pärt, Estonian composer, born 1935. His Da Pacem Domine from 2004. This has been recorded many times, and it's for solo choir. There's no text in the booklet, but the prayer is brief and can be looked up online. The choir sounds fantastic here, with the men's and women's voices each placing syllables into the sound world like an offering. The vocal quality of the choir has a nice glow to it. Let's give a sample of this really beautiful work. Now, the way each syllable sound just kind of hockets back and forth between the men's voices and the women's voices, it kind of makes each syllable sound to me sound like it's arms like reaching out and making some kind of offering. That's the image I get from that. The dynamic is exceptionally well judged in this performance too. Track 4, Jurgis Wotsapaitis, Lithuanian composer, born in 1942. This work is called Ave Maria. The work is for violin, cello, and choir, and the choir sings the Ave Maria Pleni di Gratia lines, and then I think one more line, and that's it. I don't think they do the whole prayer. The opening violin line is vibratoless, but unfolds an interesting arpeggiated harmony, which the cello then echoes. The choir subtly enters during this, sustaining the ah vowel sound on Ave, and the texture of the choir varies in intoxicating ways. This is a really interesting work. Let's hear a bit of its sound world from about the 2-minute and 20-second mark. Yeah, we do hear Maria's name repeated often in this piece. The violin steps out at 4 minutes and 27 seconds for some dramatic lines, the cello always providing a rather calm counterpoint. The choir becomes gentle in the next section, and the strings counter with sul ponticello playing. I enjoyed the serene amen at the end, coming across with gentle warmth. Track 5, Ola Gjeilo, a Norwegian composer. Now you might be asking, what's he doing on this album? He's not Baltic. Anyway, he was born in 1978, and this piece is called Serenity, and a good title for this piece it is. The rest of the composers on the album are not from the Baltic, but their work is close to the aesthetic quality and mood of the album, and that's why they were included on it. Gjeilo, as I said, is Norwegian, and the work starts with the choir singing individual syllables a cappella. The text is O Magnum Mysterium, and you can look up that text online too. The booklet isn't offering us anything here as far as the printed texts go. Each syllable is isolated and separated from the rest by a pause. The violin adds a legato contrast to the choir. So let's sample this at about the 1 minute mark. That's a really calm kind of serenity that we get in this piece. The choir starts singing without pauses between sounds at 1 minute and 30 seconds. The piece reaches a dynamic climax just past its midway point at about the 3 minute mark. It ends in the calm serenity that its title promises. Track 6, John Tavener, English composer, 1944 to 2013. This is his piece Sviati from 1995. It has a Russian text, and Sviati means holy, and we're going to hear that word often in the text, so think holy when you hear it. It's for choir and cello. The full text is 4 lines, and it means, Holy God, holy and strong, holy and immortal, have mercy on us. Okay, that's easy enough to remember. A vibratoless cello opens the piece, along with a wonderful black Russian drone, impressively sustained for a long period of time. The choral writing has a stunning calm to it. Let's hear this. I like those little glissandos between the notes, too, just connecting them. Really nice. At 3 minutes and 15 seconds, the upper voices of the choir ring out at forte volume, rather surprising, and still with great beauty of sound. The drones in Taverner's music always appeal to me. The outburst is followed by silence, and the solo vibratoless cello opening begins again. As the forte dynamic returns, the cello goes up in its range and now plays with exaggerated vibrato. Let's hear one of the more forte passages in this work. There's a chiming bell quality to the melisma in the voices on the left channel. This again is followed by silence and the opening cello and drone. The pattern repeats until we hear the cello one last time without the droning bass. Instead, at the end, the choir comes in calmly, intoning the title. Track 7, the final work on the album, is by Miroslav Skorik. He was Ukrainian, 1938 to 2020, and this piece is called Melody from 1982. It was originally for flute and piano, and the piece became a symbol of the Ukrainian struggle for freedom and a sensitive musical reflection of their path after the start of Russia's brutal war, according to the booklet notes. The piece features the violin floating above the choir's chords. The choir sings vocalese, so there are no actual words here, imitating the melody of the violin. So let's sample this from around the 45-second mark. Now we hear that melody that you heard in the violin often throughout the piece. It really continues in differently orchestrated forms throughout the 3.5 minutes of this piece. And that's the album. So despite my reservations about the presentation, the album itself is excellent. The sound quality is pristine, important for works like the Vasques, which has very quiet passages. The Vasques' work, Plainscapes, is excellently balanced, with the choir providing atmosphere, filling out the space between violin and cello. I also liked the spaciousness given to the recording of John Taverner's Sviati. The performance itself is beautifully balanced and articulated and is caught here with great transparency of sound. The album overall is deeply calming and peace-inducing. It's mostly vibratoless string playing, falling on the ear like Renaissance-era chants, only simpler and leaving more silence, so in a way it brings us back to the Palestrina album that we started with. Perhaps you can call this album an antidote for our times, and I'd say the Palestrina is like that too.
This is a meditative and warm-sounding program and recording. There's a sparseness to the string instrumentation and well-blended choir parts. The Vasques is very interesting and curious in the directions that it takes and the different tensions that build up, and then the sudden Byrd sounds. I wasn't expecting that, but it was all interesting.
A little surprise there. Nature Awakening.
Yeah. The Senderovas Dialogues is the one piece that seems to stand out as not like the rest of the program, being an instrumental duo and the only piece that really has pronounced dissonances. And after that, the program becomes more serene, and I found the Taverner particularly haunting. In a good way, though.
Yeah.
It gets you into a real serene space of mind. It's very calming. It's unique in that way. and I'd put this on if you want to free your body and mind of all tensions.
All right, so what do we got on the jazz end?
On the jazz side, I'm really excited because it's trumpet time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's always a good time. We've got 3 very different and very interesting recordings tonight. Starting out with Thomas Marriott's Screen Time. This is on Imani Records. It's a quintet. Came out January 17th. Thomas Marriott is a trumpeter, composer, and producer. He's won 9 Golden Ear Awards, the Carmine Caruso Trumpet Competition, and he's the youngest inductee into the Seattle Jazz Hall of Fame. He spent more than 20 seasons as a soloist with the Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra and is founder of Seattle Jazz Fellowship. And he's played with big names like Maynard Ferguson, Roy McGurty, Julian Priester, Ernie Watts, and Mike Clark, as well as ensembles including the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, the Captain Black Big Band, and he's played with vocalists including Kurt Elling and Rosemary Clooney. This is his 15th album as a leader. So on this recording, we've got Thomas Marriott on trumpet, Orrin Evans on piano, and Fender Rhodes, and he's the founder of the Imani label, Robert Hurst on bass, Mark Whitfield Jr. on drums, and Shedrick Mitchell on one track on the Hammond B3 organ. This was recorded March 25th, 2024 at Studio Lithos, Seattle, Washington. Don Gunn, the recording engineer, mixed and mastered by Katsuhiko Naito. And the album's produced by Orrin Evans. So the screen time refers to the big screen and the little screen, and music associated with films and shows that come from, well, a large part of our life, Mike.
Some of them do, and some of them I haven't heard before. This is pretty interesting. Some of these films I'm not familiar with.
We cover quite a span of time and some really interesting choices here. So let's jump in with the first track, which is Summer Night. Now, this goes all the way back to the film Sing Me a Love Song, 1936.
And one I haven't seen.
Yeah, me either. The composers, Al Dubin and Harry Warren. In the film, it was sung by James Melton. And this isn't heard too often as a jazz tune. I do remember hearing a version by trumpeter Warren Vacher. Here, you'll have no idea what the tune is, even if you know it, with Evans's out-there piano harmonies on the 16-measure intro. They're taking it at a fast tempo, and Marriott is in on the minor melody. It sounds cool, syncopated like they do it here. He takes it into some improvisations at the end of the melody before Hurst gets started on a bass solo. Let's hear this recording get going. Energy created by Whitfield's busy drumming. Hurst's solo is fleet-fingered and it keeps pushing forward. Let's jump back in and hear Marriott's trumpet solo on this one. the tension he built up with those rising pairs of intervals, back to the melody from there, and they stretch it out with some space for final improvisations by Marriott, egged on by Evans's piano. I thought it's a fine modern jazz take of an old tune. Track 2, here's a surprise. It's Such a Good Feeling by Mr. Fred Rogers.
Yeah, I'm not sure I remember this. I'll have to go back on YouTube and hear it.
Right, so from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the TV show that lots of Gen X people grew up with.
Yeah, and I remember that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so this tune is from 1970, and I remember it as being the closing theme on some episodes with the line, I think I'll make a snappy new day.
I didn't remember that.
Of course, Won't You Be My Neighbor? The main theme is more famous, the theme to the show, and that goes back to 1963.
Wow.
And Mr. Rogers used to sing this along to a piano part, this tune here, that had a lot of bounce to it. But here, they make a sweet version of it for Marriott's muted trumpet. I like how Evans has a gentle piano chord intro with chiming Rhodes mixed in, too, and Whitfield has catchy clicks in his beat. Let's check it out. Solo is all about tone and taste as well, so let's jump ahead and hear a little of that too. Very nice, and Evans keeps a dreamy atmosphere with chiming notes in the final melody section that ends unresolved. It's a nice tribute to Fred Rogers, who they say was as impossibly nice in real life as he was in his TV show.
I do want to say something about Mr. Rogers' music. One tune I remember by him was You Can Never Go Down the Drain. You remember that one?
I don't remember that, no.
Oh, boy. Well, he sang the song because he said that children were afraid they'd go down the drain in the bathtub,
Really?
so he sang this song. Now, the thing is, in my case, it never occurred to me that that was even a possibility that you could go down the drain. And then I heard that song, and now I started thinking about it. So I think he had the reverse effect when he sang that.
Interesting.
Anyway, there's my story for you.
All right, track 3. This is one of 2 Marriott originals on the recording. It's called Skip Intro. This one builds up a lot of anticipation with gaps between the sparse horn hits in the lines for Whitfield to work up the drums. I like the title. I guess if you're watching Netflix or Amazon Prime, as I often do as I'm on my exercise bike, I always hit that skip intro button, right? Here we've got an A-B-A-B construction with 16 measure sections. Let's take a listen. like a little dissonance to start out your solo there. That was really cool. The solos here are traded off with sections that are cut short into Whitfield's drumming. Let's jump back in and hear Evan's first go. And Whitfield hits hard on the final melody section gaps as well. Track 4, You Only Live Twice by John Barry from the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, 1967, sung by Nancy Sinatra.
Yeah, one of the best Bond themes.
I think so.
There are 3 or 4 that are great. Yeah, this is one of them.
And one of my favorite movies in the James Bond series, for that matter. As a young man, it built up the exoticism of Japan.
Yeah. I think it did that for me too.
And now that I've lived half of my life here, Japan seems anything but exotic.
Although when people come over, they still think of it as exotic. So I guess we kind of experience that through their eyes.
Through them. And this one had a lot of memorable Sean Connery lines too. You forget I took a first in Oriental languages at Cambridge. And the bathing scene. Japanese proverbs say bird never make nest in bare tree.
Yeah, I've never heard that proverb. I just want to say.
Anyway, Evans captures the dreaminess of the opening string theme here on the Rhodes, and Hurst has snappy rhythms in his bass figures underneath. Whitfield has a clicky, even beat for Marriott's warm, lyrical rendition of this melody. Let's hear it get going. Relaxed groove here makes a good setting for a subtly funky solo from Marriott, but let's check out Evans's solo on this one, where he switches to acoustic piano but keeps the ringing Rhodes going on too. Final section, Marriott joins in on those intro Rhodes figures that we heard, while the rhythm section funks it up a bit before a cute ending. And as you pointed out, Mike, if you like this tune, Bill Frisell has also recorded it. I think it's on the When You Wish Upon a Star album.
Yeah, it's a fantastic I don't want to call it an orchestration arrangement,
Right.
let's say. He does a lot of the effects on the guitar, and it's really cool.
It's really a cool tune. I was happy to hear it again in this context. Track 5, Goodbye, and the love theme from Predator.
Is that an oxymoron?
Yeah, I know.
Love theme from Predator?
If it bleeds, we can kill it, right? And this was composed by an excellent composer, Alan Silvestri, and he also composed the music to Back to the Future, and Predator comes from 1987. Now, Goodbye, this is the scene where the character Max says, "Goodbye, bro," to Blaine, who's played by Jesse Ventura. And in that scene, there's a soft trumpet kind of taps-like theme. And here, Evans brings in some kind of skittering Predator fear with piano figures before Marriott gets to the somber theme over ringing single bass notes. Let's jump back in a little later on in the tune when things get funky. Marriott's relaxed, stretched out improvisations. This was an unexpected but cool idea to make into jazz. Makes me want to see that movie again. Track 6, Pinball Number Count by Walt Kramer. This is from Sesame Street. This is from 1-minute animated segments on the Sesame Street show that teach children to count by following a pinball through a fanciful animation pinball machine. It was originally produced in 1976 by Imagination Incorporated in San Francisco for the Children's Television Workshop.
I think I had stopped watching Sesame Street by then. I would have been 11 in 1976.
You're a little
10,
older than me. But these segments made their debut on Sesame Street in season 8 in 1977, and they were shown regularly until season 33 in 2002. So that's a wide range of people who will remember this. And oh yeah, I remember this funky tune. There's Rhodes on the original and a soprano sax solo. I wonder who played it. Let's check out this groove and Shedrick Mitchell's organ added in, and you can count it out if you remember this tune.
They were really funky on Sesame Street in the 70s.
Yeah. Marriott is really plunging it out in funky fashion there. I just think we have to come back and hear more of that. It's kind of a crime to just stop it right there. Evans gets some out there, but funky improv too, with nice interplay with Mitchell's delirious sounding organ before it ends. Track 7, Dexter's Tune by Randy Newman. Randy Newman's written a lot of great songs. This is a little bit different because we normally kind of associate him with upbeat and happy tunes. This is from the film Awakenings, 1990, Robin Williams and Robert De Niro. It's a heart-tugging tune from the dance scene where Robert De Niro as Leonard says, "I won't see you anymore." And there's no way to play this one except with a melancholy kind of feeling. Whitfield gets it started with the surprisingly soft and long brushing start. Let's check it out. Very sensitive playing here, and Evans keeps the tenderness in an understated piano solo. Be sure to check out this whole tune. Track 8 is the other Marriott original, the title track, Screen Time. This is a fun tune. The structure is in an AABA form. The A sections are 14 measures with an alternating chord and trumpet figure for the first 8 measures. It's in 3/4 time but switches up to 4/4 for the 10-measure B section that includes a little break. Evans is off soloing first. Let's jump back in and hear Marriott's solo on this one and check out the cool rhythmic switch-ups. Hurst gets a bass solo on this one too before they take it through the tricky melody once more. And the recording's going to wrap up with Reading Rainbow by Steve Horlick from the Reading Rainbow TV show, which aired from 1983 to 2006 with host LeVar Burton. And this one, I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember this either. That's a long time to be on, and it was on in the 80s when I was in college. So.
Yeah, I was already a teenager in 83. Maybe my younger sister watched it, but I think I was paying too much attention to girls at that time to think what was on TV.
That might have been the case with me, too. And they were watching Miami Vice, so of course I was, too.
Right. Anyway, it's a catchy melody. Check out the interplay between Hurst and Whitfield on the intro and Evans's doubling and echoing of Marriott's lines. Evans has a fun and unpredictable solo on this one, but since it's the last tune, let's check out one more solo from Marriott. That's a really interesting groove and lots of fun ideas from Marriott. They go once more through the melody, and that wraps up the tune and the album. This was a fun recording. Themes from the big and little screen with unexpected selections, reimagined in creative ways. Two interesting Marriott originals as well. What I like best about Marriott's playing is that he takes chances in his solos, and he finds ways to work out of tricky harmonic spots. Hurst and Whitfield make a variety of grooves and feels throughout, so each tune comes off as a unique kind of space. Evans's piano playing is creative and punchy too. It's a little cultural journey as well, remembering these screen moments from my youthful days.
Yeah, I pretty much said the same thing you just did, only with different words. I want to add, though, I said it was a fun album too, and I also liked the cover art, which you didn't mention. Which shows Thomas Marriott on the screen of an old black and white cathode ray tube TV set. And that just kind of made me imagine that I was watching Sesame Street because I would have had it on that type of TV. And I said also that Marriott's playing is imaginative, and he plays in all registers, both with and without the mute, so you get a lot of different sounds from him. He's good in ballads, too. He's got this really nice sensitive way to him, like in that one from Awakenings, Dexter's Tune. Right. I also admired Mark Whitfield Jr.'s heavy-hitting drums, particularly during solos. He really added a lot of energy. And he's got a lot of patterns in there, too. He's very creative as well. The band plays with a variety of styles. You would think you have this sort of TV and movie-themed album, but musically it's a really interesting album, and there's a lot to charm and surprise the listener on this.
Definitely check it out. All right, we're going to move on to larger ensembles. Next up is the Brad Goode Polytonal Big Band with The Snake Charmer. This is on the Origin label. It came out January 17th. Brad Goode was born in Chicago in 1963. He studied various instruments from a young age. His family moved to East Lansing, Michigan when he was 13, and during high school he performed in local clubs and began playing bass as well as horn. And he met and studied with the great Ellington trumpeter Cat Anderson. And if you're a student of jazz history, well, maybe that's where he gets the high notes you're going to hear on this recording from. At a summer music program, he studied and played with trumpeter Vince DiMartino, who taught at the University of Kentucky, and Goode ended up following him there, getting a marching band scholarship. He returned to Chicago to get his master's degree in string bass from DePaul University, and he's taught at the University of Cincinnati and the University of Colorado. He's performed for more than 4 decades and over 20 albums. He's done really too much to talk about in a short spot. He's developed a polytonal system, which involves improvising over streams of simultaneous chord sequences. And he introduced that on his 2008 Polytonal Dance Party. And his origin record profile says, the music thrives on the pleasing dissonance created by, say, the guitarist playing chords at odds with the chords being played by the bassist. It's almost 2 songs operating simultaneously. That's Goode's explanation. It goes on to say the lower chords provide the basic progression, but there is also a logic in the way the upper structure chords relate and resolve to each other. As long as it sounds good, and you're going to get some interesting polytonal ideas in some places in a big band format. We've heard Brad Goode before on the podcast, going back to episode 130, Lovin' Good Vibes. That was from September of 2023, and that was on Ted Piltzeker's Vibes on a Breath. That was on the OA2 label, part of Origin, and that made our favorites of 2023 list. Exciting solos and a unique tone are what you can expect from Brad Goode, and we're going to check out some of his compositions and arranging here. So, the big band, Brad Goode is on most of the trumpet solos. The rest of the trumpet section, John Lake, Sean Appleby, Emily Hartranft, and Hugh Reagan. Alto sax, John Gunter and Camden Johnson. Tenor sax, Carl Schultz, Jonas Schaufler. Barry sax, Alexandra Lauren. The trombones are Sam Griffith, Grayson Stewart, Jack Bendur, Joanna Griffith. And the rhythm section, Victor Mestas Perez on piano, Tim Wendell on guitar, Eddie Ness on bass, Paul Romain on drums, and John Davis is the conductor. The album's produced by Brad Goode, recorded, mixed, and mastered by Colin Bricker at Mighty Fine Productions, Denver, Colorado. It was recorded on December 1st and 3rd, 2023, and, as with all great Origin albums, cover design and layout by John Bishop. The music here is all composed and arranged by Brad Goode, except for a couple numbers, and I'll point those out as we go on. Recording starts out with Goose Chase, and a thrilling goose chase it is. There's a 16-measure intro with rising figures of harmonic tension that burst into the main swinging melody with trumpet on top. There's a repeating 8-measure section that gets big backing horn hits, and then 2 new 16-measure sections and a final 4-measure climax. It's a great, exciting arrangement. I'm going to take a long sample so you can hear all of what I just described. From there, Carl Schultz is up for a tenor sax solo. He weaves through the tense harmonies, skillfully getting some horn backing and ringing guitar from Wendell. Those final 4 measures of the initial arrangement are back to usher in Goode's solo, so let's jump back in to hear his trumpet on this one. Unpredictable and exciting stuff there. Keep your pets away from the speakers for those altissimo reaches. Victor Mestas Perez is next with a piano solo that's both rhythmically and harmonically exciting. New swinging lines of horn arrangement come in and lead up to the final super syncopated section of the melody we heard before. There's going to be a lot of new things coming up all the time in the arrangements on this recording, so I can only just give you a taste in the samples. Track 2, The Snake Charmer. This gets built up gradually from the rhythm section with layers adding to the arrangement in 12-measure sections. Good is up next there with improvisations that get interjecting lines from around the band. After about 2.5 minutes, a lighter section over bubbling bass from Ness has an alto sax solo from John Günther. The rhythm section drops out for an interesting horn arrangement to build back up into a bass solo from Ness, and Goode is back for a section like we heard before, but with more sounds from outer space. Let's jump back in for a little bit of that. Very cool. Bet you didn't know the trumpet could make some of those sounds. And the ending of this tune builds up in sections like the beginning that we heard to a sudden ending. Track 3, Just a Thought. This is a good tune, but arranged by Noah Fulton Beale. This has a settled R&B straight groove with nice bass lines from Ness. Before the unison trumpet and guitar melody line comes in, instruments stack in with bell-like chimes. After that section, the saxes and then horns on top transition to a warm-toned guitar solo from Wendell with interesting rhythmic phrases and fluid lines. A sax section arrangement works to a full band build-up and a trombone solo from Jack Ben-Dur. Let's hear some of his playing. I like his relaxed phrasing and fluffy tone. Goode has the final solo, working up to higher phrases with some sizzle and fun glisses. The band arrangement reaches a climax and comes down softer before a final slowed ending build-up with some harmonic surprise and searing trumpet. Track 4, Ornithology. This is a Charlie Parker tune, of course, composed with trumpeter Benny Harris. It was recorded by the Charlie Parker Septet in 1946. It's a bebop tune. This is a contrafact, a new Parker melody written over the tune How High the Moon. Here the tempo is kind of relaxed, but the arrangement is great with a lot happening. It sounds like Goode's trumpet and the saxes on the main melody. You can hear the Barry hanging low on the right, and the rest of the band has hits and exciting backing lines. Camden Johnson is up first with fine tone. Let's hear the start of the tune into the sax solo. Very nice tone. And we get a Barry sax solo on this tune as well from Alexandra Loren, and we rarely pass one of those by on adult music, so let's hear a little bit of the Barry sax. And that's Sam Griffith next on trombone. There's a new arrangement of an original melody line with Goode's trumpet on top, some exciting horn punctuations, and a full band push to the end. Track 5 is Pentacles. Something unique here, as the title suggests, there's a 5-beat rhythm. It sounds like some polytonal action is going on here too in the harmonies. Goode has a searing trumpet line above some busy guitar and bass, all of that making interesting harmonic combinations. The harmony gets even more interesting with clusters of horn tones on long notes coming in behind. The next horn arrangement section has echoing lines between the sections. Goode is back for more solo lines, and the band arrangement has a lot going on. Let's check out the ending of this tune. Track 6 is Cabin in the Sky. This is a Vernon Duke and Jean Latouche composition from 1940, and Benny Goodman recorded it in that year. This has an interesting build-up before you'll recognize the tune if you know it. Let's check it out. Joanna Griffith has a trombone solo, and the trumpet solo on this one is by Emily Hartranft. Nice of Goode to share the trumpet spotlight. Let's check out her melodic solo on this one. final section has an exciting band build-up and more trumpet from Goode. Track 7, Hypnotic Suggestion. The chord progressions here are kind of hypnotic, with little descending figures from Goode on top that get more rhythmic. Then the band is in with some nice timbre mixes of mutes and flutes before Goode is back again with some laser blasts up high. Let's check it out. Next, there's some extended trumpet trading between Goode, John Lake, and Sean Appleby, so let's jump back in and hear a little bit of that. The band builds back in an exciting fashion, picking up the opening melody figures into more new ideas. Finally, the opening section with Goode into the mutes and flutes arrangement comes to a sudden ending. And the recording ends up with a final Goode original arranged by Noah Fulton Beale, I Can't Forget About You. This is the longest tune on the recording at about 11.5 minutes. This has an uplifting beginning with stacking horn lines coming in from the left and right over the bass. It gets a rock beat in the drums, but the sax lines still really swing into Goode's entrance on a trumpet melody. The arrangement builds lushly around his simple trumpet lines. Grayson Stewart has a trombone solo first, followed by Jonas Schoeffler on tenor sax, both starting softly and building up. There's a fun rhythmic arrangement with interplay between the horn sections. Let's check out Tim Wendell's guitar solo over the popping bass lines of Ness later on in the tune. And good follows there, starting out with some bluesy licks and working up to high soaring lines. He works it back to the melody with an exciting band arrangement that pushes to the end with more trumpet ideas from Goode. And that's it, a recording of big band music that's exciting in a lot of ways. First of all, the program has a lot of variety, focusing on Goode's originals and including a standard and a bebop tune from Charlie Parker. The arrangements constantly evolve with new things happening right to the end of the tunes and feature a lot of creative interplay between the sections. There's some challenging rhythmic feels and meters and dense harmonies on the way. Brad Goode's trumpet solos always grab your attention immediately and go in unexpected directions. He shares the spotlight generously, and we hear from most of the horns in each section with solos of their own. Brad Goode has a very individual sound and improvisational style on the trumpet, and this album shows off his creative compositions and arranging as well.
Yeah, we're really on the same wavelength tonight. I said similar things again. I read, in one of the reviews, that Brad Goode is simultaneously melodic and angular in his approach and integrating the two. And I thought that was a good description of his approach on this album. The compositions all have solid harmonic starts. Then the harmony will suddenly change and we'll find ourselves floating for a while until a solid key is reestablished, sort of like in a classical piece, except that it doesn't sound classical at all. It's surprising and rather appealing in big band music. I found that to be a surprise. I thought it was out of the ordinary. Goode really likes squeezing out those high notes, and he uses the entire range of his instrument, favoring the upper range throughout the album, as you mentioned, and produces some impressive playing and adventurous ideas as well. One of the great things about a big band is the amount of timbres that can be drawn on in solos. There's a lot of woodwind in this album, too. I especially like the approach in Ornithology, where I think that was a baritone sax and trombone are both hanging out in their mid to low ends for their solos, giving an overall dark timbred tone. And things like that just really attracted me. So all in all, this is a great sounding big band album with some harmonic and solo playing surprises.
Yeah, excellent stuff. All right, and one more with a large ensemble here of a unique nature. This is from trumpeter Erik Jekabson. His recording is Breakthrough on Wide Hive Records. It came out January 17th. Erik Jekabson was born in 1973 in Berkeley, California. He studied at Oberlin Conservatory, and he spent time playing in New Orleans, France, and later spent 5 years in New York. He toured in bands led by singers Howard Fishman and John Mayer, and he worked in an off-Broadway show, played with the Illinois Jacquet Big Band, and co-led the jazz quintet Vista, and he made his debut recording, Intersection. Then he returned to the Bay Area in 2003, getting a master's degree at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Among other recordings, this is his 8th recording as a leader, and we've heard him on the podcast on Jason Kaiser's recordings, Shaw's Groove and Kind of Kenny, both tributes to great trumpeters. We also checked out his last project on Wide Hive Records with Daggerboard called Escapement, and that was back in March of last year, episode 157, Frenchified. And I remember, Mike, that you picked up on the classical minimalism influence on that recording.
Yeah, minimalism. There's a lot of it here. It popped out at me right away.
And I want to thank Erik for sending me the credits and a press release for the recording. And the press release for this one notes that Jekabson has long been an admirer of contemporary classical music, especially minimalism and its aftermath, and, quote, I really like the post-minimalist classical composers like John Adams and people coming out of that direction utilizing jazz and rock language. I like a lot of the ECM moody stuff and contemporary composers who are pushing the boundaries in all different directions. So keep that in mind. I would have liked to know some insight into the titles here, which are quite interesting as well, but they remain kind of a mystery. So you can wonder along as we listen to this recording. But we've got to go through all of the musicians on this recording. Not everyone plays on all tracks. I'll point them out as we listen to the music and go along, but I'll just go through the cast here. Erik Jekabson on trumpet and flugelhorn on all tracks. Dan Fiesley, I hope I'm saying that right, on bass. Jason Lewis, drums. Dan Zemmelman, piano. Jeffrey Burr, guitar. Max Brody, guitar. Mads Tolling on violin, Anthony Blay on violin, Cherith Premawardana, viola, Ben Davis, cello, Mary Fettig, flute and alto flute, Dana Bauer, oboe and English horn, Matt Renzi, clarinet, alto sax, tenor sax, and oboe, Jameo Smith, bassoon, Jeff Cressman, trombone, Jonathan Ring, French horn, Jonathan Sieberlich, tuba, Stan Muncy, percussion, Dylan Vado, vibes, Becca Burrington, and Alexis Lane Jensen on vocals on one track. All music composed and arranged by Erik Jekabson and recorded at Wide Hive Studios in Berkeley. It's going to be hard to do justice to all the developments that are happening in the interesting arrangements on this recording with short samples, but I'll do my best. Starting out with the opening track, Jane Wants to Tell You Something, Part 1. We get something really neat right away with Jekabson's horn with woodwinds in an arrangement of bell-like ringing tones with a kind of mechanical rhythm. The contrast of his long tones and the woodwinds is very interesting. Strings come in with bass and light drumming. As Jekabson continues on the melody, the woodwinds have turned to fluttering lines like birds flying around him. I'll let it play a little bit long so you can check all of that out. The strings get subdivided bowed lines and the woodwinds more rising and falling lines as it goes on, building up a tension before Jekabson's trumpet solo. Let's join back in to hear his playing. His lines have a reaching quality like a bird trying to soar higher and higher in the air currents. Then Faisley gets an acoustic bass solo with clear lines into the upper register, and it connects directly into track 2, which is part 2 of the composition. Rhythmic strings make a bed for pretty clarinet and flute lines to weave around each other. Just before a minute where Jekabson re-enters, the ringing vibes add to the lush atmosphere. We hear the rising and falling woodwind lines from part 1 return, and the drums and bass push the intensity to the end. In the interest of time, let's just sample that beginning string and woodwind section because it's really lovely. Dreamy stuff. Track 3 is The Whisperer. Lewis starts this one out on the drums with a relaxed but funky beat. There's a catchy melody phrase with a repeated interval lick played by Jekabson and the brass together over thick-toned electric bass lines from Faisley. Strings and woodwinds are added in subtly, and Jeffrey Burr's guitar is added into lines. Jekabson has some improvisations over minor scales as the winds echo the previous melody figures, and Jekabson's back to the figures with answering woodwind and brass lines in a section that works up to a guitar solo from Burr. You should hear all that in one continuous section to appreciate the detailed arranging. I'll sample from about 4.5 minutes in, where there's a reset to gentle rhythmic strings that bring Faisley's bass in on some tasty lines, and then Jekabson's return. Woodwind lines swirl and trill in. The ending has a lush full instrumentation and surprising harmonies. Track 4 is A Centered Vibe, a new mood here with interesting rhythmic strings. As the title suggests, vibes work in with Jekabson's trumpet melody, and it sounds like tenor sax as well, played by Matt Renzi. Let's hear it get started. Violin starts to work some nice lines there, I assume by Mads Tolling. Dylan Vado gets a solo on the vibes with string and trumpet lines softly backing, working up to a solo break and a return to the rhythmic strings and trumpet melody. The ending has Jekabson's improvisations continuing over rhythmic strings that dissipate into light pulsing and fading drums until he remains just over the ringing vibes. Track 5 is Speedway Meadow. There's vocalizing on this track with a rhythmically tricky and jumpy melody idea. It sounds like mixed meters. It comes off joyfully. I like the way the guitar and vibes are worked into the arrangement and the way that the violins double the vocal lines. And then we get two vocal parts with clarinet adding in. Let's check it out. There's a lot happening there, and it all builds up to a clarinet solo from Renzi, and I'd like to sample that a little bit as well. Follows on guitar next with an agile solo, and then Jekabson getting backing vocal lines, a new section of vocal, violin, clarinet lines, and then guitar adding in builds up excitedly to some solo drumming from Lewis with high note vocal hits sounding like trumpets. The ending section is fun with two vocal lines and a big climax. It's a really happy sounding tune. Track 6 is Sun on the Keys. On this one, pizzicato strings sounding like pentatonic raindrops make a setting for Jekabson with interesting harmonic shifts. A violin joins him on legato phrases. Let's have a listen to this. Midway, the strings turn legato with the solo line that really sings out, I think in the high register of the cello. Very nice contrasts in the string arranging. Track 7 is Above the Clouds. A hypnotically rhythmic string section gets things going on this one. Flute and xylophone tones stand out as it gets rhythmic push from drums and throbbing bass, and the arrangement thickens with richness of the French horn and trombone. a new rhythmic string idea comes in, and then a low trombone line. I really like the funky groove set by acoustic bass for Jekabson's solo on this one that we should check out. Orchestrated backing adds in with some solo violin lines trading with Jekabson. There's a full ensemble arrangement to more trumpet lines, and then a final section returning to the original rhythmic string intro and melody idea into trumpet and violin trading with an abrupt ending. Track 8 is El Don. Max Brody is on guitar on this track. Featuring in the intro, there's a different kind of horn arrangement with sax, trombone, and tuba filling out the low end nicely. It works into shared and traded lines with guitar and piano. Things get moving over walking bass for a bit before more arrangement, then a walking bass waltz feel section for a piano solo from Dan Zemmelman. It lightens for a solo from Jekabson, and it sounds like he has a trumpet backing track in the arrangement behind his solo lines too. We hear those pretty guitar and piano lines again with bell-like brass notes chiming into more rhythmic change-ups before a spacey ending. Track 9, Washington as a Surveyor. Jeffrey Burr is back on guitar on this track with a hypnotic ostinato figure. Shimmering flute from Mary Fettig and oboe from Matt Renzi weave together, getting joined by violin. Bass and drums add a groove to the guitar's rhythmic part to bring Jekabson into the melody lines. flows along with trading and weaving lines of the winds. Mads Tolling gets a violin solo on this one, and the arrangement works to a new rhythmic ostinato on guitar and what sounds like vibes with no sustain. Clarinet lines burble with Jekabson over the top until the ostinato changes again, now with flute and oboe, again working to the end with final ringing vibes. Tracks 10, 11, and 12 are Into the Jungle, parts 1 through 3. A gong brings us into the jungle with mallet percussion and winds simulating birds and maybe other wildlife. Let's hear a little bit of that. As it goes on, the bassoon lines will catch your ear, and it arrives at what I pictured as like a clearing in the jungle where we find some hidden civilization, and Jekabson enters as the leader. Let's hear a little bit of that interesting transition. Ending gets back to jungle sounds, connecting to the next track with rhythmic strings. And in part 2, Jekabson has a melody line above the building arrangement. I like the rhythmic section in the middle where Jekabson has improvisations. So let's join in midway to hear a little bit of that. Sounds to me like marimba mixed in there as well that goes into the later section until just the winds are left. And then part 3 is short at less than a minute and a half. A lonesome trumpet line, oboe, and flute get it started into a kind of regal procession that ends in high register piano lines and trickles. And the recording ends up with track 13, Sunset on the Keys. Rhythmic strings and a trumpet melody create excitement. The solo violin on this track is by Anthony Blair. It's a short track, and I'll join it midway where it picks up a pizzicato bass line I believe is played on the cello so that you can hear how the recording ends up. And that's it. This is a really beautiful recording. I can only give you snapshots along the way, and I strongly suggest you cut yourself off from the outside world for an hour and 10 minutes to enjoy this in its entirety. The individual pieces fit into a whole arc that's quite a musical journey. The instrumentation, arrangements, and tonal combinations are fresh, and the rhythmic character is invigorating. When Jekabson's horn becomes the center of attraction, his solos always have a melodic direction and sense of lyricism. Jekabson mentions music that is pushing the boundaries in all different directions, and that's what he's doing here. We can identify the different influences in this music, but we don't really need to give it a label. Perhaps just great adult music will do.
It's a bit of a combination of things here. It's a unique approach to jazz and a nice discovery for me. I don't think anybody's ever done this sort of minimal kind of classical approach to accompanying jazz. I feel like classical and jazz crossover albums are a real risk. They're often intriguing, although they're never really great, I think. But this one is eminently listenable and enjoyable. Minimalism is usually an immediately appealing type of compositional approach. Jekabson makes that the case here. His minimalistic accompanying material is easy on the ear and generally slow-moving, and with serene, open sky type harmonies. The music is all uplifting, not always the case with classical minimalism itself. But the minimalism here doesn't seem to set the feel of the entire track. New repeating ideas keep appearing, and generally the solos are low-key, adding to the overall vibe rather than showing off virtuosity. It's really a calming, enjoyable listen all the way through. Washington as a Surveyor is a good example of a track where the classical minimalism ideas are up front, driving the track. I found Sun on the Keys to be an odd but still likable track. It was interesting to keep oddly timed pizzicato violins setting the backdrop for solo playing. Also, Sunset on the Keys reminded me of Steve Reich's Different Trains with its melody. Right. So I heard a lot of Steve Reich on this album. Into the Jungle Part 2 sounded a bit like it had some Steve Reich rhythms on it. So you could check out Steve Reich, too, if you thought this was intriguing. This is a light, enjoyable album with a serene tone to it. It was really immediately enjoyable.
Yeah, really interesting combinations of instruments and creative ideas. There you have it, 3 really great trumpet albums in the jazz section this evening.
Well, really 6 great albums we heard, and I think we have 6 more next week that I'm really looking forward to next week, too. I mean, we have a lot of good records coming out.
Yeah, let us know what's on the menu for classical next week.
Well, we have to start with Wranitzky Volume 8 from our friends, the Czech Chamber Philharmonic Orchestra Pardubice and Marek Štilek, and Daniel Bernardson writing the booklet notes and being the Wranitzky scholar that really turned us on to Wranitzky's music. So we'll be looking at that. A new recording of Orff's Carmina Burana. Does anybody remember this piece? It hasn't been performed, I'm sure it's been performed, but it hasn't been recorded in quite a while. And here we have a recording of it with Paavo Järvi at the helm. And I'm really intrigued to rediscover this because it's a piece that I've heard, but I haven't heard it in a long time, and I'm kind of interested to get reacquainted with it. So we'll be talking about that. And then for our contemporary recording, well, it's half contemporary. Something So Transporting Bright. That's the name of it's the name of a movement of a piano quintet by Gloria Coates, who is now deceased, but it has other contemporary composers on the album. And that's for piano and string quartet, and we'll be hearing 4 pieces from that album next week.
On the jazz side, we're going to check out guitarist Mason Rosavi's new recording. It's a self-release with our friend Brian Ho on organ. We've got some sax on there as well. That's called Even Keel. And we're going to continue on with more organ. I just can't stay away from organ releases. And this is an organ trio with Norwegian jazz guitarist Frode Jekstad. It's called Jazz Detectives. It's on Lawson Records. It's a really fun recording. I've been listening to it already. And then one we just have to hear that we've been waiting for, pianist Bill O'Connell's Touch. It's a trio recording on JoJo Records. So
we haven't heard him on the podcast for 2 years now, I think, right? Maybe 3.
We heard him with Conrad Herwig.
Oh, okay. And we heard A Change Is Gonna Come. I'm thinking of his solo album that we did maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
But it would be interesting to hear him in kind of an intimate trio setting. So I've been listening to it since it came out already. So we'll get those 3 in.
Yeah, certainly like his style. So I'm looking forward to that too.
And if you want to get listening to these recordings as we are during the week, a few hours after the podcast is published here. I'll have those up on a playlist on Deezer, and I'll put up a link to it from our Facebook page as well. As always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Lots more great music to come as we get through winter and push into spring. Any final thoughts for our last January episode, Mike?
I'm still thinking about that Mr. Rogers song, You Can Never Go Down the Drain, and it sort of made me think. I never really thought you could go down the drain, but apparently young children from around my age learned that they couldn't go down the drain from that song. And when I heard that song, I learned that there must be people out there who are crazier than I am. And I think I've actually associated with some of them as adults during my life.
Definitely. Well, let's forget all those people and enjoy a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Some of them I wish they would go down the drain, but...
Anyway, we'll be back with more great music next week with episode 199. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.